Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We're buzzing as always. It's your host, Matt Zahab, and we have another episode of the Crypto News Podcast today. Today's guest is Jake Yocom-Piatt, the co-founder and project lead for Decred. He's a cryptocurrency pioneer who has been using, funding, and directing the creation of open source software for 10 plus years and has been featured as an expert source for a variety of top-notch publications like the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, CoinDesk, and many more. Prior to Decred, Jake funded and oversaw the creation of BTC Suite, an alternative full-node Bitcoin implementation written in Go, whose source code has been used in several other notable projects like the Lightning Network, Ethereum, and Factom. He's also the co-creator of ZKC, a high-security asynchronous chat system. Without further ado, I'm very pleased to welcome Jake Yocom-Piatt to the Crypto News Podcast. Jake, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Pumped to have you on. What a bio as well. You've written some pretty important code, eh?
Well, I'm not really I'm not a developer, so I don't really write the code, but I'm really more of the project manager. So I've been the project manager for quite a, we're almost at the 10-year mark for the time I've been participating in the cryptocurrency space. So I think we started in right towards the end of 2012. So we're coming up on the end of 2022. So I'm almost at my 10-year mark.
What's the diff between writing the code and being the project manager? Because if you're going to be the project manager for something like that, I feel like you got to know the code as well.
Well, I think that, when it comes to code and it comes to managing developers, the process is one that, it takes a bit of a soft touch in the sense that, right, you can be a developer yourself and manage people, but you can also know what the software is supposed to do, make sure that it does it, and then have people who can independently create the software that does what you request that it does. So gotcha. I'm really my background prior to this was really as a system administrator. So I'd set up, I'd be able to set up mail servers, web servers, secure communications, VPNs, all that kind of stuff. So I can set up all the machines and run all of it. I still do some of that myself. And then what I can do is then when people who are developers do work, they'll do the work. And then at a certain point, they'll be like, okay, I've got a branch. It's got this feature ready. You want to test it out. And then sometimes I'll test the branches before they get merged. Other times, I'll wait until it gets merged to master and then I'll check it. And, that's sort of how I roll. So I roll more from a management perspective and somebody who is a technical user and administrator more so than having a background of writing code myself.
Interesting. So you're like the eyes in the sky for the project, just making sure everyone's ducks are in a row and putting out that final polished product.
Yeah, and I try to keep it creative in terms of project vision and so on. So instead of being like, oh, hey, I noticed there were some bugs in your code, it was more like, hey, do we have this important feature ready? How much longer is it until this, feature, or for example, this new product or this new project is done? So that's really the way I approach things. Is I don't approach things from such a hands-on hey, I noticed that your conditionals are a little messy. You need to clean up your code and you need to have more test coverage. The developers I work with are pretty independent, and so they do that most of that themselves. And then, hey, sometimes they'll get involved with each other and be like, hey, I noticed that you didn't have enough test coverage in your code, and so there'll be some back and forth on that level. But I'm more sort of like if we were likened to a pirate ship, is I'm the guy who will climb up there and put the sight glass out and be like, oh guys, we got to go west, guys, look, there's something bad up ahead, we got to go west. So I try to be more like the captain of the ship than the
Gotcha.
person who's micromanaging people who are pulling ropes and pulling sails.
No, well said. And speaking of code, how crazy has this Elon Twitter fiasco been? Especially, I don't know if you saw last week when I think he gassed that one employee, fired him right on the spot, fired him on Twitter when, he said something. Elon was like, oh, the code at Twitter shit. And this one employee was like, no, it's not. I'm writing X, Y, or Z. My apologies. I'm not too up to par with all the code speak. And then Elon was he just gassed him on the spot. Is that not When the hell have we ever seen something like that before?
I think that you have to keep in context how things operate in Silicon Valley. Is I'm from Chicago, and then I've recently moved to Florida, and the whole team that I work with has been distributed all over the U.S. and in some cases, like Europe and Australia and so on. I've worked with people, across the planet, and we've never really had an office, so we've always been like remote only workers. Whereas when you talk about, say, Silicon Valley and how Silicon Valley corporations, particularly the publicly traded ones, are run, is that they're run very, very differently from even most cryptocurrency outfits, in the sense that they have huge numbers of middle managers who go to meetings all day and pat themselves on the back about the one developer that implements their work. I mean, if I recall correctly, Elon had commented, by headcount, there were 10 managers for every developer at Twitter. So it's like out of a staff of like 8,000 people, it's like, what does that mean? There's like, 7,000 managers or, like 7,000 and change managers and like 800 developers. So when you're in that scenario and it comes to firing people, I mean, I would be lighting people up. So I think that Musk's approach is pretty interesting in that regard. And then the other thing is, I saw an interesting comment on Twitter about how it was a cull and bail, I think was, I forget exactly the exact term that was used, but the idea was there's so much fat to trim there that you may as well just try to find the 10% that do the 90% of the work, fire the other 90%. You're going to get it wrong sometimes, and then you'll have to be forced to sort of, eat crow and rehire those handful of people. But 100%. By doing that, you can just iterate that process and go through and just trim all the fat out, and then find the people who actually do all the work in the process.
It's pretty crazy too. I don't know if you saw a couple of those videos. There were a couple of TikToks in particular of Twitter employees literally going to the office, getting a gourmet catered brekkie, an $8 barista coffee, going to their 2 meetings of the day, going to the mall, fucking around at the lake or whatever, going to see the Golden Gate Bridge. It was absolute bonkers.
Yeah, it's a bit of a clown show, right?
My question is, how does it, I know these publicly traded companies, obviously they have KPIs and whatnot, but how do you let it get that bad? That's what I don't understand.
I mean, my impression is that what we've seen, this is a weird sort of macroeconomic answer I'm going to give you, is how does it get so bad with middle management at these Silicon Valley or publicly traded corporations? Is it didn't used to be like this, and it became like this over time. And I think my hypothesis here is that this is a function of easy credit. That is, that as a function of basically, post.com, the Federal Reserve dialed the interest rates down, and then basically correspondingly central banks all over the planet, or at least in Five Eyes states like Canada, dialed down interest rates in step with the Federal Reserve. When that happened, that easy money created a mechanism for reinforcing really bad behavior. So historically, there's always been middle managers. There's always been a certain amount of middle management. But hey, maybe there were 3 or 4 layers between, say, developers and the executives or something, right? But that's become like this just layer upon layer upon layer as a function of the fact that the corporation, any corporation that's, makes decent money, can get loans. And then they can get huge amounts of loans at an incredibly low interest rate because, they're so solvent, their business is good. Then they can take those loans and buy back their own stock, and then the stock price goes up. And then when the stock price goes up, guess what? The managers get, they hit some sort of, share price target or some deliverable target, and then, they get a payout, they get a bonus. And that process becomes like self-reinforcing to the point where it's like, it used to be that there was there was a certain amount of bloat, and then as a function of this, incentive system, is just like the bloat just keeps increasing. And that's where things have gotten. And now that the Federal Reserve is finally hiking, its target rate, we're seeing all of the fat getting trimmed all over the place, whether it's Elon or people at other major tech corporations.
Yeah, the party's over. It was bound to happen one way or another. Last sort of point on Twitter, and then we'll get into Decred and some crypto fun stuff. I have I wouldn't say a lot, but I have some friends and people in my network who aren't fans of Elon for reasons that a lot of people aren't fans of him. I personally like him. I don't see how you couldn't like him. I think he's net positive for society. That's just my opinion. He's, flying people to space. Perhaps you see it differently. But I think he's a good dude. I think he creates positive change and is a pretty good influence for most people. I don't understand how people would bet against him though. Like, this guy's got an almost perfect track record. I know there's been some blimps in the road, and I know there's been a couple shit shows here and there, but how would you bet against Elon? I don't really get that.
I think that, well, my view of Musk is that Musk is, first and foremost a salesman. He's incredibly talented at selling whatever it is he's doing or whatever it is he's making.
He can sell and build, which is one of the very rarest combos on the planet.
Well, exactly. Well, here's the thing. He doesn't even need to build. He finds the people who build.
Exactly.
And then he makes sure that the management structure isn't complete garbage, which is effectively what he's doing at Twitter. And he's like, this is a hot mess. We got to get rid of a whole bunch of people. And so he goes in, he trims the fat, and then he's salesman extraordinaire. So he sells like, hey, I'm going to change Twitter. All this stuff's going to change. I mean, I don't know about you. I've been using Twitter. Barely anything seems to have changed. So
right now,
functionally, very little has changed. I mean, that's the irony, right? I mean, what percent of the employees have been fired, and the thing is still ticking over just like it was? And I feel like, when it comes to people betting against Elon, I feel like Elon has been sort of towing the line between the left and the right politically in the United States, and at least nominally globally. And as a function of that, of course, he's drawn some ire. But what you have to recognize about that is my perception of that is it's very intentional. He views this interface between left and right as like a hot button, boundary where you can walk that line. People freak out, and then that magnifies his sales power. So that's my read on what he's doing. That is that there's going to be people, especially on the left lately, who are like, you can't do this, you should censor this, you should censor that, and you should do what I say. And his goal is trolling them. So, him trolling them is it isn't even so much about alienating them and making them enemies. It's about creating controversy and magnifying his sales power.
He's a master of influence. There will be books written about Elon's way of manipulating and influencing the gen pop. Like he might be the best in the world at a present day. I don't think there's anyone better.
Something I've always wondered is it him or is it staff of his who are like, who's his manager, who's his shadow manager, like, yo, Elon, say something stupid about the share price, it'll get you in trouble with the SEC, and then it'll create all this buzz. And that's like, oh, the SEC slapped me on the wrist and made me pay $20 million. It's like, it doesn't matter to him. But it's like somebody knew that that's the line to walk, and walk on that line, but it's almost like someone is telling him, here's the line, but don't cross it, right? They tell him to walk right up to it and sort of play games, and then he walks back.
I wonder how many of the elites and the 0.00001% have a right-hand man or woman by their side who's doing this stuff behind the scenes that we'll never know of.
I've wondered about that myself. I have people I work with, but my personal behavior and my personal choices are very much, they're very much me. But it's like I almost feel I get the distinct sense I'm not as I'm not as public a figure as Elon, where right. It's like there's these lines where it's like he comes right up to the line and doesn't cross it. That begs the question: is who is coaching him? That's my question.
Yeah, I want this person to write a book or start a YouTube
I'm surprised
channel.
This person isn't a billionaire, but hey, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe he knows exactly where the line is himself.
Yeah, treating them well. I love that. I think he's an interesting dude. But hey, enough about him. Let's jump into Decred now. You guys have done some incredible stuff, and I will let you get into that. But one thing that is very vague, but gives just such a long avenue to sort of think about is sort of your tagline, which is Decred, money evolved. What exactly does that mean?
Well, the big idea behind the tagline is that Decred was set up as a cryptocurrency that can evolve, where early on, I started working on Bitcoin, and what I saw after a few years of working on, basically an alternative to the Bitcoin Bitcoin Core software, was Bitcoin didn't want to evolve. The Bitcoin Core developers wanted Bitcoin to stay very much the way it was, and they wanted very much to stay, as the sort of the central planning committee for the project. And effectively they have, via Blockstream and these other sort of affiliated entities that do core development for Bitcoin. So Bitcoin really it was this amazing piece of technology. It drew me in. I spent a few $1 million working with developers to write the BTC Suite software, and it wasn't evolving. So I feel like money evolved is really is to take this idea that started with Bitcoin and really make it step it forward and keep it moving, because we can keep looking backwards and keep trying to find ways to be like, oh, it should have been like this. The block size should be exactly this and nothing should ever change. But I feel like that sort of static reasoning, that's exactly how we got the fiat banking system that we have, which is people going, hey, I don't want anything to change. And, we're never going to give people actual custody over their own assets. And then, along comes Satoshi, and Satoshi goes, well, no, we can make crypto assets and you can always have custody of them yourself. And it's like that process needs to continue. And I feel like Decred is the continuation of that process, so that we're evolving and we are money evolved. We've already evolved and we will continue evolving.
It's a great line. Something I've thought about many times too is what could Bitcoin have potentially been if sort of the core dev team and everyone involved was less reluctant for change and sort of would have been more open-minded? Could that, obviously in a different world that could have happened, but like, do you think they ever look back on that and are like, damn, maybe we should have let it ride a little bit more?
I think people's egos and things like NGU, like number go up, right? Those are very dominating forces. Many people care about number go up to the point, or NGU, I'll just use the acronym from here on out, care about NGU over everything else. And that isn't really why I got involved in the space. I mean, hey, it's great that the number goes up. I like that. I mean, I think everybody who holds some asset and the number of that asset goes up are like, yeah, this is doing it. I'm really, I'm making money, or, this is a good investment. And, but for me, it was, these broader ideas like sovereignty and, self-custody. Like, for example, when you go to a bank, you might have $1 million in a bank. But what's $1 million in a bank? $1 million in a bank is just it's a database entry. Somebody can hit a button and delete it. Somebody can hit a button and freeze it. Somebody can send you a letter and be like, oh, no, you got to go to another bank. And then you could go to another bank and they could do the same thing. So
just a bunch of numbers and commas. That's it.
Yeah. And I mean, that to me is there's a lot more to Bitcoin and just, digital sovereignty than what the Bitcoin core group wanted. And it was interesting to see sort of like this interplays. I've worked with a bunch of open source, software projects in the past, and hey, I've been effectively. I had my group kind of kicked. Several of the devs I worked with kind of kicked out of OpenBSD because several of them were OpenBSD developers over some ego nonsense. I believe Theo suspected that we were going to fork the OS. We weren't, and he preemptively kicked people out. And it's like, what it comes down to is that a lot of open source projects are about ego and not about, progress or changing things or anything. It's just pure ego. And the reason is right, most open source, there's no money involved. There's, there's basically the pride of doing it. And so the pride really kind of takes over everything else. So I feel like that's a big driver of what ended up happening, which is that the people who were in charge of Bitcoin didn't want to be diluted by new people showing up and adding cool new stuff to Bitcoin and sort of changing things up. So they're like, we want to keep things the way it is because we're in charge and we don't want you to gain any kind of sovereignty. So that drove people like me and a whole bunch of other people out of, the Bitcoin space, because it's like, well, we can't innovate here when things are the way they are.
So classic. And again, unless you're sort of in the trenches, that's something I've rarely thought of. The incentives.
Well, you don't see it. Like, you got to be
inside.
You got to get close enough to the beehive to see the inside of the beehive, and then you're like, oh my god, this is. Or maybe the better metaphor is, this is how the sausage is made. I don't like it.
Yeah. Wow. A lot of red tape. I guess. I never really thought of that. The red tape and the gatekeeping on the code. That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, in our case, one story I can tell, particularly because it's several years after the fact, is people were being told privately to not run BTC Suite. Miners who were interested in running it were being told not to run it. Other people who were interested in running it, who were in larger organizations, were told not to run it. So basically, there was a whisper campaign run against BTC Suite to prevent its uptake by the Bitcoin core group and their affiliates. So just the fact that as soon as I heard about that, I'm like, this is ridiculous. I am so done with this. The way I see it is, hey, having multiple implementations of the Bitcoin consensus system, that's a good thing. And they really didn't see it like that. So I was like, I'm going to take my tools and go somewhere else.
It's a crazy story. I'm I'm shocked. I've honestly never thought about that before. This is a narrative that isn't really discussed a whole lot about the sort of evolution and lack of just new features with Bitcoin. Why isn't this mainstream?
Well, I think that what it is that you have to remember that maintaining control over a group typically involves controlling the narratives that group subscribes to, and who better to do that than the people who are the central planning committee for that software project in this case. So the way I see it is that most people don't put it. I mean, think about it. Okay, how many other full node implementations of Bitcoin are there? I believe it might just be BTC Suite, even though there are these other ones. But what the other ones do, if I recall correctly, is they import the consensus rules from Bitcoin Core. And BTC Suite is the only one that doesn't. I think I can't remember if that's correct or not, but that's really what it's become. And then the only people who get to see what I've seen are the same people who maybe did their own full node implementation and in any way didn't hook, line, and sinker go along with the core devs. So that was just it was basically, I was like, hey, this is cool, let's do this, and then they're like, oh yeah, we don't like you because I showed up with money and they didn't have any at the time, and then they showed up with a whole lot more money with Blockstream, and I was like, you guys have gone fully VC to go the path you're going. I'm not going there, girlfriend.
I'm out.
Because I've already been there and it ain't all that.
What a story. Folks, we're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, we are going to talk about Decred and how they are moving and grooving in the political scene with voting, privacy, campaign spending, and a whole lot more. But before that, we've got to give a huge shout out to our sponsor of the show, and that is Prime XBT. You guys know I love Prime XBT. Been using them for a hot minute now, as they offer a robust trading system for both beginners and professional traders. Doesn't matter if you're a rookie or a vet, you can easily design and customize your layouts and widgets to best fit your trading style. Prime XBT is also running an exclusive promo for listeners of the Crypto News podcast. You get 50% of your deposit credited to your trading account. Again, the promo code is CryptoNews50. That's CryptoNews50, all one word, to receive 50% of your deposit credited to your trading account. And now back to the show with Jake. Let's jump into the Decred show now. You guys did something insane in a country with a lot of turmoil at the moment, and that is your influence on the political donations in the 2020 municipal Brazil elections. Usually there is just an absolutely absurd amount of corruption, and the Decred blockchain was used to track this. Give me the whole down low. I'm so curious about this. I want to know everything there is about this. How did you guys help in this case?
First off, what we've had since launch is we've had an unusually large amount of support and participation from our Brazilian community. We have several developers. They're Brazilian citizens and residents. And we have a community in Brazil, which is in some ways more substantive than that in the US. And so in relative terms, we've had a whole bunch of interest and action from Brazil over the whole lifespan of the project. And that's really great. I historically have gotten on well with Brazilians. I used to play capoeira back when I was a kid, and my wife is Brazilian. So what it comes down to is I was just like, out of nowhere, we didn't put any real effort to be like, we're really courting the Brazilian community, just showed up. And so we have a big Brazilian following. And then what we noticed was we had made a tool back in 2018 called DCR Time Stamp. And what it does is that it allows you to upload hashes or documents. And then those hashes of those documents, or the hashes themselves, get anchored in the Decred blockchain once an hour. So you might upload a hash, maybe take an hour or two for it to anchor, and then you have proof that, for example, a particular document or statement or whatever was made at on or before a certain time in that anchor. And that's a really useful sort of generic tool. Like let's say you're an inventor. You could, instead of taking your inventions and getting them notarized by a notary public and being like, look at this signature, you can digitally sign your documents, upload the hash of those documents, and then use that as a way to prove when you came up with some invention or some innovation. So that generic process had attracted some attention in Brazil. And then there's a company that does document notarization in Brazil using our system, where they sign it then the signed document stamp is anchored in the Decred blockchain. And then that is used in lieu of like someone signing a document and stamping it and doing the usual like physical notarization process. That has been going on since I think 2018 or maybe 2017. And then that sort of morphed into what we've seen in 2020 with the municipal the municipal elections in Brazil. So that's the mayoral races and associated races. So apparently there's a lot of hot money in Brazil, particularly when it comes to elections. And so what people were doing is that candidates were openly publicly declaring donations as they received them and anchoring that data in the Decred blockchain, so that it would enhance the transparency of the political donation process for those elections. So that started in 2020, and it just kind of came out of nowhere. And as best I can tell, it was an extension of this notarization process that's been going on.
So this new sort of product line, and mind you, it's not really a product line, it's just a use case rather, but this new use case in the political realm it sounds like it wasn't intentional on your guys' end.
It was entirely emergent. That is that someone created a product in Brazil. That product got some traction. My understanding is that it caused enough trouble in Brazil that there's an association of notaries. They got upset about this because basically it's a huge disruption to people who are physical notaries. And as a result of that, that got traction. There was some drama about, are you allowed? Is it a valid way to notarize online like this in Brazil? And then that turned into sort of additional transparency for political donations in 2020. And then there's been further development since, and more recently in the presidential election.
Jay, come on! You can't just dangle the carrot in front of me like that and not keep going.
Well, I mean, so the way it's gone, from there is it went from, say, publicly proclaiming donations in 2020 to in the 2022 race. What was it? The Lula Haddad ticket. For the presidency there, they had apparently they had enough issues with people claiming that their policies were going to be X when they were really Y. That there was enough sort of drama around that they also decided to anchor these documents, their policy documents for the platform they were running on in the Decred blockchain as well. And they did this so that people can't simply claim, "Hey, here's your policies," and then mail out, documents that are bogus. So basically, it's enhanced transparency for the policies, of the I guess it would be the Lula Haddad administration, I guess. And so that was part of their presidential campaign. And I guess I saw how the results turned out. It was pretty contentious. In the Bolsonaro won in every by like a percent or two in every province except I can't remember it off the top of my head. The one province that's in the northeast it's in Nordeste, I think. So literally the northeast province. And it was like a blowout for Lula, and that was enough for them to, take the election. And so, hey, we contributed a tiny bit to that campaign via this technology.
Did Decred get any publicity, news on the ground in Brazil while this was going on? Like, were any news outlets being like, "Hey, there's blockchain tech and cryptocurrency that is actually being used for the greater good"? Or was it just sort of under the radar?
I think there was some, but to be honest, we in the Brazilian community, sometimes we're super in sync. Sometimes it's just we're completely independent. I mean, I think there were several members of our community who got some traction with this because it was enough for there to be like a Cointelegraph article written in Brazil. And then that sort of traveled around. And then, from there, it got back to the States. And then, of course, Cointelegraph in the US won't run that article, but that's a whole nother story.
Well, you just gave me the perfect segue. How can blockchain be used to improve the process of, we'll stick with the great US of A, but just really American politics? There's so many things going on that are very sketchy in the American political system, in the American political realm. And it seems like blockchain can definitely provide a multitude of use cases to help fix a lot of these problems.
For sure. I mean, if you look at what Decred really is we were talking about how Decred money evolved. And the way we evolve is through voting. So basically, the beating heart of Decred is our proof of stake system, which involves voting. So it's like you buy tickets, the tickets lock some coins for a while, and then the tickets go into a lottery. It's a sortition, really. And then you pull out 5 tickets every block, and those tickets vote. They can vote for a number of different things, right? You can vote on the validity of the previous block. You can vote on, any consensus changes that we have active at the time. And so the way we make our whole system work is through this, secure blockchain voting system that involves locking coins, voting, getting a reward for voting, and then the coins unlock and you can do it all over again. And so what seems to me to be a major, major problem with the United States, I mean, it's like clown show level problem, is this process of voting. I mean, I voted in the midterm elections, and then the process is, right, you're given, you go somewhere, you show them that you're a registered voter, you get a piece of paper that's like a paper ballot, you fill in some circles, and you slide it into a machine. It's a total joke. I mean, and to be honest, it's really not so different from everywhere else. I mean, the part that's really different in the US is how clownishly long it takes to count all the votes. It's like everywhere else, they're able to count the votes in a day or two. And in the US, they're like, oh, this is going to take a week, or this is going to take 3 weeks, or who knows how long. Oh, we got to recount them all. And it's like the whole process is a joke from start to finish. I mean, right? What's to stop somebody who was, a corrupt person inside of one of these voting organizations from going, I'm just going to photocopy 10 million copies of these ballots, spread them out to my friends, and then we'll feed them through the machines when nobody's looking. I mean, that's really what the whole thing comes down to. And cryptography, just like we see with Decred, can basically solve this whole problem. Further time stamping can make it, prohibitively difficult to cheat in a way, even if you could get a hold of ballots, which if you issued them and used cryptography, you could do it in a way that would be very, very difficult to make fake ballots. Is even if you did get fake ballots, then you try to dump them all in at the end, and it's like, well, these timestamps look all screwed up. What, you can't go backwards in time with the blockchain and be like, oh, these tickets are actually from a day ago or something, right? So when it comes to voting, I think that voting more generally is something that is a huge problem in the United States and everywhere on the planet. So when it comes to voting, I think that the technology that we've developed inside Decred, both in terms of the voting system and in terms of the privacy system we use, which is actually already integrated with voting, the voting and staking process for Decred, could be basically transposed onto a nation state system with not a huge amount of work, to the point where you could do things like you have an app, and the app basically confirms that, your face matches an ID. You get a ballot. The ballot becomes private. You can vote the ballot. The ballot goes on to what's effectively sort of it's not quite a blockchain, but it would basically be like a record that runs parallel to the blockchain. And then everyone can see all those votes. Every single person can see that their vote was tallied towards the candidate that they support, that they voted for. And, this isn't rocket surgery. These systems could have been put in place 30 years ago.
But
the fact that they haven't been is a bit of a joke.
On the tech side of things, not let's not get into the nitty-gritty blockchain stuff, just on the sort of consumer-facing front-end tech side, you need obviously 2FA or for voting, probably even 3 or 4FA. I don't even know what that would look like, but you got your username, your password, 100% you need Face ID. You need pictures of your, passport, driver's license, upload all of that. It gets you on to the next thing. It's really just a classic KYC. Like anytime you sign up for a new bank account or do anything in regards to financials. Or
get a driver's license.
It's like all the tech we have is there. Yes, people like my grandma would not use this, but there's no way you could not tell people like my grandma to do this. She would have to go in person, and you would leave those open. But you could, I would assume 80% of the population would prefer this new age tech that would probably take 1/10 of the time to vote. And if it's on the blockchain, in theory, hopefully it couldn't be manipulated, right? And that's why I feel like blockchain is the only way that this could work. Because if it was some centralized entity, they could do whatever the hell they wanted to, and they could rig it in whichever way possible. It's crazy, but hopefully, I don't know, 2028 maybe? You think it'll happen now?
We'll see. We'll see. I mean, that's the part that really makes me disappointed about nation state voting systems is that when it comes to voting, there's a lot of incentive. That is, let's say I'm the party that currently is cheating the most. I have a huge incentive to prevent any kind of changes to the system, right? I want everything to stay exactly how it is so I can keep cheating and keep winning. And, that changes over time. Like there's been historically, in some cases, there's a history of Democrats cheating and there's a history of Republicans cheating too. So it's a back and forth here in the US, and the incentives are super weird. So that I wouldn't be surprised. Let's say I could make this perfect system, snap my fingers, boom, I have it. I think I would really struggle to get it deployed in a lot of places because of these weird incentives. Like let me give you an example. Let's say you make an app where you can do all this shit from home. You don't have to go anywhere. You can basically go, okay, I have a driver's license in the state. Oh, I use the phone to do a liveness check. It makes sure my facial recognition is close enough to the driver's license. It gives me a ballot. I wait a little bit. I cast my ballot. It broadcasts publicly. It all ends up tallied. I can confirm that my ballot was counted. There are still going to be people who don't want this because, it'll do things like, oh, the voting might start to skew younger than older. Yeah. And you can't trick a 25-year-old the same way you can trick a 75-year-old. Yeah. And then the political parties and everything starts to shift. So there's really weird incentives about this.
Yeah. And then I feel like the whole jobs play would come into oh, you're taking, tens of thousands of jobs, everyone who is at these voting stations and all this, just craziness.
I mean, the fact that voting systems are custodial, in the sense that it's just like a bank account, right? You put $1 million in your bank account, somebody hits a button, it can all disappear. It's like you're giving these assets to this third party. It's mind blowing that people trust this stuff. And even years ago, there was some Australian guy I engaged with on Twitter where they were like, "Oh, our secret ballot system's the best," and I'm like, well, why don't you just add cryptography to it? Because, hey, a secret ballot's just a piece of paper in an envelope. I mean, maybe that was great technology for 1800 or whatever, but it's no longer, it's no longer 200 years ago or something. We need to, kind of upgrade this and get the ball rolling. And the guy just unloaded on me and was like, fuck you, you're a scammer, blockchains are garbage. And it's like, are you not listening to anything I'm saying? We're talking about voting. And there's a lot of people who really just don't want to hear it.
Have you heard of ArriveCan, the Canadian app that our government made us use when traveling?
No, I'm not aware of that.
So it was an app that, was budgeted for, I think, $2 or $3 million, ended up costing $40 million, absolute piece of shit. Anyone who was traveling, I had, American friends who would come to see me, they just got rid of it. But if I had American friends who were coming to see me, they would have to use this app, right? Where you upload all your details. It's a big checklist. Have you been exposed to anyone with COVID? Blah, blah, blah. It was just a COVID travel app. And seeing the rollout of that sort of just gives me so little faith in governments being able to roll out a nationwide scale, political voting app like the one that you and I are talking about. Even if we had people like you and people smarter than you and more perhaps ready to take this on, I still couldn't see this being rolled out because of the fact that it would have to be done with the gov. It couldn't just be let's let, Peter Thiel and Musk or some of the PayPal mafia build out this app that would probably be pretty seamless. I just can't see them getting it right. And that's sort of shitty to have such a nice solution in hand, but no light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, I feel like that's sort of inevitably the case when it comes to technology, right? Look at Bitcoin. People thought Bitcoin was a tinker toy and useless for several years before people were like, holy shit, this is a huge innovation. I want a whole bunch of these Bitcoins, and then started, accumulating them. So that process, it takes a while for things to catch on. And the way it always has to work is that it's going to start somewhere. And then the incentives start to align for everybody else to be like, oh, we got to jump on this bandwagon. And the bandwagon effect can be powerful. I mean, and just like you've said, when it comes to software, though, I mean, software development from the government, it's like I will say this: there are some very talented people who work for the government, but they are a tiny minority. Yes. So that you're either part of the 10% that does 90% of the work, or vice versa. So it's just like Twitter in that regard.
It's bananas. How about the last couple of weeks in crypto? What a shit show. It's been tough on all of us. And I think of myself too, the sentiment, having friends and family text me and call me and being like, hey, dude, hope everything's all right. Hope you didn't have any money on FTX. And I didn't. But again, it's just like, it's tough. And not even that honestly, that was heartwarming. It was nice that it's a good reminder that, you know, people care about you. And it's just, I like to think I would have done the same thing. But again, just having people reach out, knowing that something bad could have happened always feels good. But on the flip side, just the FUD and the nonsense and the general sort of sentiment in the space. Do you not think it's been a tough couple of weeks just to like continue building and continue grinding? Like it's been like, again, you've been in the space longer than I have. I'm still not a rookie, but you know, definitely haven't got my reps in like you. But I just feel like it's with such a shitty light shined on us. It's tough sometimes.
Well, to me, this is just another day, to be honest. I mean, for years, I mean, basically ever since FTX showed up and gained any level of prominence, basically my perception of it has been it was a churn shop. It was basically a volume churn shop scam. And whether it was Alameda running the churn shop or, you know, someone else they farmed it out to, that's how, you know, a lot of exchanges work. So there's basically you look at these volume stats that are attached to most exchanges, and I would estimate maybe 10%, more like 1% of the volumes that you see across everything are actual real volumes. And the rest of it is basically people with bots, and hell, bots probably filling against their own order book. I mean, where they'll allow it. And then in cases where they won't, they have two entities, one where it fills against the other. And they're like, oh, hey, John, hey, Jake, you know, hey, like, just let's fill back and forth and make up a whole bunch of fake volume. So this volume churn shit is just totally run of the mill, totally standard operating procedure. And to frankly, I always thought FTX was a scam. I think a lot of things in the crypto space are a scam, and that doesn't necessarily endear me to a lot of people, because there's a lot of wealthy people who may not be the smartest money in the room who have put a lot of money behind these ideas, or these people who are, you know, basically turning the crank and churning and doing all these usual sort of like crypto scams. To me, it's just another day. My only hope is that we don't end up with totally bananas crypto regulation over this, because when you shake all this out, this is just a run-of-the-mill corporate scam. That is, some guy set up companies in Hong Kong and Bahamas, and like a bazillion shell corporations.
Happens in every industry, happens all the time.
And normally it just doesn't get as big. That's the only difference, is that it got really big because of crypto, because there's a huge amount of hot money in crypto. And then not to mention there's also dark elements of crypto who are trying to launder money. And so people shuffling and churning huge amounts of money in offshore, you know, corporations, and doing that already, that's a magnet for that kind of, you know, dark money. So it doesn't surprise me that this has happened. And it's just, you know, it's bound to happen. But the idea that we're going to regulate crypto and it's going to change anything, this is 100% nation space, meat space company nonsense. This guy ran a fraud. He defrauded a bunch of dumb people. He rehypothecated his collateral over and over again and overvalued it, marked to fantasy. And it's like, it shit blew up in his face. And it's like, about time. I've been waiting for a while, and I'm like, this FTX stuff seems like a scam. You got like major celebrities endorsing it. I mean, what a joke. I mean, you can't even compare it to the rest of the space.
But again, think about if you were a 2021 crypto rookie and you see Tom Brady and you see, you know, Steph Curry and all these other, you know, multinational famous people promoting something. Like, I feel like that would at least give you a vote of confidence. No?
Well, that's the unfortunate, you know, nature of, you know, confidence games, which is that, you know, there's always going to be the con man. And in some cases, the con man isn't even winning. I mean, those guys, none of the people who you've named, and none of these celebrities who, you know, were, you know, associated with SBF or, you know, FTX or Alameda or whatever, none of these people have the depth of business skills required to spot a scam like this. They're there because they're being paid. They're not there to scam you. But, you know, you better believe SBF knew that, you know, when you stand up somebody like that, that's a really powerful sock puppet to a lot of people to be like, I support this company. It's like, I mean, that to me is like a double sign of a scam. Also, like, you know, like, I don't know, like, paying huge amounts of money for pointless commercial, like a Super Bowl commercial. Listen, if you're advertising to people for Super Bowl commercials with cryptocurrency at this point, like it's a scam. I mean, that's where I'm at.
There's some sketchy shit going on. What do you think the market and the overall sentiment, what do you think is going to happen over the next couple of months? And mind you, we'll timestamp this. We're recording mid to late November, and this episode will air end late November. So with that in mind, what do you think is going to happen sort of end of the year in the next 6 weeks, kind of call it, and early Q1, Q2 of 2023?
I think that the silence out of Barry Silbert from DCG is
alarming.
deafening. He has gone silent since November 7th.
Yeah.
That strikes me as something a lawyer told him to do. That is, don't talk publicly
Right.
because you're going to put your foot in your mouth like a certain person, SPF, and you're going to dig yourself a big, big hole. So my read is that DCG and Genesis and that whole, Tower of Babel may be shaky. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens. I mean, consider how large a position that DCG and Genesis have in a whole, several major cryptocurrencies. This could really shake things up. That is, if they got blown out, which I suspect they have based on sort of the silence from Barry, they've gotten blown out. They're going to have to liquidate positions. Genesis is a major market maker. So if Genesis isn't making markets and then they actually have to liquidate a position that's, say, I don't know, one of the largest positions in several different chains, it's going to be a real, I'm expecting fireworks. Frankly, I'm surprised that I haven't seen, that we haven't seen it yet. Maybe there's some sort of effort to avoid the fire sale that likely is needed to, to backfill losses from FTX related investments that have exploded in people's faces. So that's my read on where things are going. And, hey, maybe I'm wrong and DCG is going to be able to pull it out. But my read is that they're in very, very serious trouble. And that could turn into big problems for the space just because there's such an outsized influence over the space. Like, they own CoinDesk. They do Consensus. Like there's all this
Jake,
infrastructure that depends on.
You're scaring me.
Well, hey, I'm not saying it to scare people away. I'm being real.
No, I know, but your realism is scaring me. Normally it's refreshing. This time it's scaring the living shit out of me. Something
to think about is I was here when Bitcoin went from like 1,200 in January 2014 to 200 like a few months later. So believe me, if you have any Bitcoin where you're like, oh, I got a few of these and they're worth like $1,000, and then it's like, oh my God, they're all worth 20%.
Nothing.
And it stayed that way for years. This is in the grand scheme of things, this is nothing, but I can understand how this would be, disconcerting to people who haven't been in the industry as long.
The one thing that scares me the most is Tether. And I've had Paolo on the podcast twice. I love Paolo. I think he's a great guy. I trust him. I hope this is all good. Again, this is not a financial advice podcast. Neither of us are financial advisors. Well, perhaps you are, but I'm definitely not. And Tether is the thing that if Tether depegs, I don't even want to talk about it. But I think if DCG goes down, we'll be fine. If Tether depegs, I think that will be the most catastrophic blow to the community. I don't think anything worse can happen.
Well, one thing that I think is good about the Tether situation is this. I hate Tether. I hate these stable coins because stable coins, it's basically like this idea that we want to make something that can't fucking possibly be stable in a normal world and stabilize it. The only reason that you have like a stable value for fiat currency is because there is a lender of last resort, like the Federal Reserve, who can manipulate markets at scale and then thereby stabilizing them. So basically, the only reason fiat currency is stable in value is because there's a massive scam that envelops and runs the whole planet such that you can use that scam to stabilize the value. There isn't a corresponding backing scam with crypto. And so you have to concoct a scam to create that stability. And I mean, Tether is shaky. But here's the good part. The good part is Tether, if Binance said, I don't want to use Tether, I want to use BUSD today, Tether would implode. Now, the reason I say that's a good thing is because I don't think CZ will do that. I think CZ will not do that, because that would negatively affect all of these other things that he holds. So we're currently there's a quasi-stable equilibrium and aligned incentives to at least hopefully prevent that from happening.
If you were me and had some Tether on the sidelines, what would you do with it? And I don't want to cash out to CAD, because then just half of it's gone.
I would say this, and the same thing goes for Tether or for anybody who has fiat. The thing that I've always advocated for is if you believe in cryptocurrency and you think it's the way forward technologically, take whatever assets you have and slowly and steadily buy small amounts of the cryptocurrency you like and withdraw it from an exchange and store it yourself on a hardware wallet. And that's a time-tested way to approach this, because you don't want to dump all of your assets into cryptocurrency at once. It's psychologically crushing, right? Like, let me give you an example. Let's say you bought all of your Bitcoin when it was $1,000 and then it went to $200. That is going to be, you are going to be losing sleep. Your family, your significant others, like, you're crazy, I'm getting a divorce, and all that kind of stuff. You don't want to be there, but take your fiat assets, whether it's Tether or actual fiat, and slowly buy the cryptocurrencies that you think are good bets. I mean, I think, Bitcoin is an easy one. Hey, I like Decred, but I understand that that's not everybody's bag. Ethereum's not bad. Go in and buy small amounts of stuff that you think are good buys. And then what'll happen is that as the market comes down, you dollar cost average into it. Now, maybe that doesn't happen if Tether explodes in your face, but I think you got some time with Tether.
So you wouldn't be worried if you had, not a decent bag, but let's just say a small bag of Tether. You wouldn't be worried?
I wouldn't be particularly worried, but I would start, basically fading out of that position just in case.
Where do you go though? Because again, if Tether implodes, Bitcoin and ETH are also imploding. Like, what's the scapegoat?
Well, yeah, but I mean, what, you're going to escape to fiat? I mean, that's no escape. I mean, look at what's going on with the inflation. I don't know how exactly it's running in Canada. We're running probably 15, 20% here in the US, and then they lie about it and cut it in half for CPI.
Yeah, same with us, just as bad, but if not worse. But I mean, maybe not worse, but very, very similar. But I mean, if I don't want to cash out and grab some Canadian shitcoins known as CAD, what would your play be? Throw it into Bitcoin, throw it into ETH, bit of both.
Yeah, go get some Bitcoin, get some ETH, get some Decred if you can, and then just spread it out. And what I would recommend, again, for psychological reasons, because not a lot of people have the psychological steel to not panic if a price drops. Slowly and steadily fade into positions in coins that you think are going to stand the test of time. I mean, one thing that I can't help but point out about Ethereum is like, you think it's just a coincidence that people can't unstake? I mean, technologically, I know that unstaking is probably the easiest part of a staking system to add code-wise. Why aren't they letting people unstake? Because it would negatively affect the price. And there's a worldwide liquidity crunch. It's almost like somebody saw that coming.
Yeah. Vitalik's
so it could make Ethereum a better bet than usual.
Jake, what a treat, man. This has been a lot of fun. Can't wait to have you on for round 2. Until next time, wishing you and the team all the best. And before you go, can you please let our listeners know where they can find you and Decred online and on socials?
Of course. I can be found at I'm Behind Text on Twitter. The project is Decred Project, no spaces. You can find us on chat at chat.decred.org. And never forget, the revolution will not be centralized. And I mean that. No corporation failing is going to end this. And, so even if something major blows up tomorrow, it's not the end. It's just another step.
Jake, appreciate you bringing the noise, man. Had a lot of fun this episode, and can't wait for round 2.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Folks, what a great episode with Jake from Decred. Brought the noise, tons of knowledge bombs, and a really unique insight into how blockchain and crypto can help with our political systems. If you enjoyed this one, and I really hope you did, please do subscribe. It would mean the world to my team and I. Speaking to the team, love you guys. Eustace, the GOAT of all sound editors. You're the man. Appreciate you. And to the listeners, love you guys. Keep on growing those bags and keep on staying healthy, wealthy, and happy. Bye for now, and we'll talk soon.